We're the two teachers.
Where school is always in session.
Today we're looking at our first big linkage institution, political parties. Andy, linkage institutions are those institutions in our democracy that connect we the people to the government. Political parties, extremely important.
Political parties are one of the most famous linkage institutions, not referenced in the Constitution. Of course, we knew that our framers, those founders of the Constitution, were very suspicious of political parties. They viewed them as self-interested factions. So the political parties aren't officially referenced in the Constitution, but we know that the right to assemble in groups protects our right to parties and our right to many other linkage institutions.
Andy, we know in political science that political parties are growing weaker, that they've had to adapt to candidate-centered campaigns due to all the communication technologies available. But in my mind, democracy is unthinkable without political parties. Political parties want to win elections, and they do this by recruiting good candidates. Andy, this is an extremely important piece in our democracy, and we count on our parties to say that candidate, but not that one.
Well, parties are a really quick way to make an educated vote. I know particularly younger Americans, a lot of our students are very suspicious and skeptical of parties. They don't want to be typecast as this party or that party. But the reality is that when we have elections with party labels on them, we have much higher voter turnout rates because parties do a decent job of getting out the vote, of mobilizing voters. And again, that party label becomes an easy shortcut for voters to cast an educated vote. And I gotta tell you, Dan, particularly amid the chaos and the tumult of policy, what kind of policies should our government adopt in the middle of COVID-19? You might not like parties, but parties are that galvanizing force in our legislative organization, Congress. And it's those legislative leaders who are organized based on parties, and it's that leadership that helps to create this massive policy and legislation. We could not be doing this effectively, passing these big pieces of legislation in this emergency without the role of party leaders in Congress.
Well, we're also
so essential.
We're also noticing the resiliency and adaptability of our political parties in moments of crisis. We know they have platforms, they stand for these issues and they stand for these issues. They have their big tents, respectively, trying to attract voters in. But in times of crisis, those platforms change a little bit. Their policy priorities morph into what's needed at the time. And again, it shows the resiliency of political parties, which shows a good example for us as voters.
And let's not overstate it too much. We know that the Democratic Party will still continue to be liberal, more liberal, and the Republican Party will still continue to be more conservative. But you're absolutely right. In a time of emergency and crisis, it is a time where you see quite a bit of new ideas and issues that come up that parties have to address. And so you do see those changing platforms, particularly because, like you mentioned before, our campaigns are so candidate-centered that as those candidates for office, not just for president, but for legislative office as well, as they come up with new ideas, we see the parties adjusting to those new ideas and those new stances.
Andy, my students always ask me about, are we a multi-party system? I see that we have so many parties, and we have to kind of tippy-toe around and say, well, we're really a two-party system, because really the only two major parties win, Republicans and Democrats. But we do have third parties, and the question is, why do they exist if they don't win?
Well, we know that the rules of the game are set up to promote a two-party system, and that specific rule that we see in most legislative elections and in the Electoral College is called winner takes all. And the idea that when you have a winner takes all system, or in legislative elections, we call it a single member district system, it promotes a two-party system because really that third party can run, but there are significant obstacles to getting enough third-party candidates winning to be able to have a political factor. But we still have third parties. We have a long history of third parties that have brought up ideas that the Democrats and Republicans don't address. And those third parties, when those ideas catch fire, when the population agrees with the ideas of the third parties, even if that third party doesn't win, we note that the Democrats and Republicans tend to change their platform stances to address those ideas that third parties brought up in the first place.
Well, these Beastie Boys continue to fight for the right to party. Political party. We're the two teachers. No fancy words.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.